Okay, so chapter 8 started out by talking about things that have changed programming, like regulatory reform and the FCC's decision to let networks return to syndication. Talks about the technological change, which mostly talked about the adoption of digital signal transmission, and what the chapter called multiplex, which was having several channels on one frequency. Then it talks about the pressure from competition, how networks no longer have the majority of viewers like they used to, thanks to cable and the internet and mobile media. And then it goes into some sources of TV programming, like networks, TV production divisions of movie studios, independent producers, and local stations. Network television is a program service, meaning it's an expense, so they make all of their money at the network-owned stations by selling time to advertisers. The idea of the station-network relationship and how it started in radio, and it talks about the pros and cons to this relationship. A pro being it saves money with economies of scale, and the advertising can now be shown at a national level. But a con would be that some affiliate stations are of kind of poor quality and performance, and that makes networks want to look for stronger affiliates. Then we talk about Fox, CW, and My Network TV affiliations, and how they're giving the independent stations more of a network look, making them less local. It talked a little bit in this chapter, on and off, about the three major Spanish language networks, Univision, Telefutura, and Telemundo, and how Univision was the fifth largest U.S. television network, Telemundo was the second largest Spanish language television network in the U.S., and how it's shown both in the U.S. and internationally. And what I thought was interesting was that it mentioned that because of the audience that the U.S. Spanish language channels offer, they tend to actually draw a lot of attention from advertisers. Who'da thunk it? Affiliation agreements. It's the legal document behind both a network that binds both a network and an affiliate. So networks will pay affiliates to broadcast its programs, and this fee is called a network compensation, and then affiliates exchange commercial airtime for network programs. Why an affiliate might not air a network program. Some reasons an affiliate might not want to air a network program would be like a local news emergency. It decides to air its own local product. It might deem the network content inappropriate for local viewers. Maybe it wants to keep the advertising time and revenue to itself, a lot of different things. It made note to remember that networks are not licensed by the FCC, only stations are. And I thought that seemed kind of important to take note of. Then it talks about the pros and cons of local newscasting. A pro would be that it serves broadcasters' commercial objectives. Like, newscasts are rarely failures as far as content goes. People may have different tastes when it comes to entertainment programming, but when it comes to news, it's facts, and they're hard to fail. The newscasts are exclusive. It builds the newscast's brand. The content can be altered, unlike regular broadcast programming, making it unique. And then the cost is a pro, and it's profitable for stations. But a con to the local newscasting was that it is slightly being pushed out of the spotlight by the internet. Syndicated programming. Basically, syndicated programming is programming that's used to fill the time slots where network programs don't fill. It talked about the primetime access rule, which I thought was a really interesting fact. It limited affiliates to 3 hours of network programming nightly, and it prohibited stations in the largest 50 markets from airing off-network syndication in prime access. So it actually benefited affiliate stations by allowing them to show syndicated programs as long as they weren't off network in a previously primetime slot. So they actually got to keep all the commercial revenue for themselves. Then it talked about how when that rule was appealed, it drove the cost of off-network and first-run syndicated programming down for affiliates. Talks about off-network syndication and how there's not really a set price for television programming. So the ways that programming can be paid for is that it's sold by a weekly license or a per episode. Some pros for syndicated programming is that the show already has created a name for itself and it's gained national exposure. And the episodes only shown once or twice on the network because that's all they were allowed to show them. Once it goes into syndication, these shows that were only shown once or twice that people might have missed seem new. And then advertising time at the syndication level is a lot cheaper. A benefit for stations when it comes to syndicated programming is that the syndicated programs allow them more freedom to cater to local tastes. A con for stations when it comes to syndicated programming is that they, no longer the network, but they are responsible for failure costs as well as promotional costs. And syndicators aren't very loyal to stations, especially once the contract ends. And they're just going to go for whoever has the best price. Then this chapter talks a lot about the different day parts, or how the hours of the day are grouped that reflect the lives and viewing habits of an average American family. So when we're talking about the early morning day part, we're talking about the lead-in period to network morning news programs. The content is going to fit the early risers who sometimes don't even look at the news or watch it necessarily, but they listen to it. So a lot of times they'll make the newscast more appropriate for that, is for listening instead of watching, because people are getting ready, people are helping their kids get ready, people are making breakfast, stuff like that. Affiliates will sometimes preempt network morning newscasts in exchange for syndicated entertainment or reality programming, because they're not looking to compete with other network programs or network programming for a maximum profit. Instead, they're looking for the lowest cost for them because they see it as a somewhat insignificant day part. The morning day part, its main strategy is just to complement the demographic appeal of programs supplied by the network. Afternoon day part, this mainly shows soap operas, court shows, talk shows, game shows, and it's going to be the most programmatically consistent day part. That doesn't really change. The early fringe day part, it's kind of a low priority time period for the network, so they tend to give that time back to local stations. And usually local news or syndicated talk is shown, but usually local news, because news is in fact a good lead-in for more news. The primetime day part, this is where the viewing levels and the advertising revenue is the highest. And the only local programming that's really shown in primetime is news. One thing that I thought was really interesting was how Fox has its affiliates air news an hour before all the competing networks have their affiliates air news. So it's a really, really good strategy as far as counter programming goes, because while all the other competing networks are showing entertaining programming, it's more just for entertainment. It may even be syndicated programming. Fox is airing news, so it's a good counter programming strategy, and it gives people an option to watch it an hour earlier for people who don't want to wait or have other things going on later. Late fringe day part is usually going to target younger viewers who are switching from switching to TV from the internet. It's a strong day part for affiliates that don't have a network feed. And another effective move for the late fringe day part is to air talk shows that were on earlier in the day but that some people may have missed. And then an interesting fact about the late fringe is that it reaches a rare audience, which is the male audience. The late night day part is kind of, while some channels are going to air entertaining network programming, other channels or other networks like ABC are going to counter that with more serious programming. And because of the time, its content isn't as restricted. And for some stations, they see this as a day part. They see this day part as a time to take risks, because the failure of a TV show isn't as important with the Hut Levels so low. And of course, the overnight day part. Okay, because Hut Levels are so ridiculously low in the overnight day part, content is going to be filled with repeat syndicated programs, repeat newscasts, and of course the dreaded infomercial. And I talked about a little bit about how this day part is not important usually because the Hut Levels are so low, but how there's always room to make more money, so as far as advertising goes, so they don't completely ignore this day part. Weekend programming is interestingly enough going to switch from targeting the usual heavy viewer, which is women, and it's going to target men. And they're going to do this both with advertising as well as with programming content. So basically we're talking about sports all weekend long. And then it goes into talking about promotion, and how stations favor a combo spot for two reasons. One, it's more efficient, meaning basically you're killing two birds with one stone, and it increases the chances of program flow. And a promo tip that it gave was that programs with similar audiences should be promoted toward each other. So like goes with like. Types of promos for news, but not only news, was the typical promo, which is a promo about a specific story, and then an image promo, which creates a general impression of the news, or not necessarily the news, but its product's overall identity in the viewer's mind. Then it said that ad prices for media like the radio and newspapers and billboards and cable are increasing, and how they're increasingly becoming too high for most to afford. It says TV is still the most efficient buy for both reach and frequency, but its efficiency is declining. And one way media has tried to combat this is to promote online. But one of the cons to online promotion is that it depends on the viewer's selective exposure. It said that the number one threat to broadcast is technology, especially technology that frees the viewer from passive viewing. And it talked about the threat of convergence to broadcasters, but not necessarily cable, because convergence is kind of a pro for cable. It talked about the threat that cable now offers around-the-clock local news channels, so they're like little miniature CNNs, and how that's a threat to broadcasting as a local medium, and how these cable channels also threaten broadcasting because they can offer more advertising time at lower rates. So mobile media also presents a threat, because not only is it instantaneous, but now it's also becoming increasingly individualized. Wrapping it up, basically broadcasting is threatened, but is going to persist persist mostly because it's free and universal. Can't beat that. But broadcasting will ultimately have to adapt a little bit to the changes in order to stay competitive. And that pretty much covers Chapter 8.